Why don't we get to the Democrats?
Okay, so we had Alyssa Slotkin, who I don't know what these people are thinking, but former spook who is now being offered as like the new face of the Democratic Party. She gave the response to Trump's State of the Union and longed for the days of Ronald Reagan. I mean, it's just like, you just can't make this up. Now she had a guest appearance on The View, where she talked about her view of the country and what's going on right now politically. Let's go ahead and take a listen to that.
I think there's a feeling in the country. I mean, I often say this, we're about to turn 250 years old, right? We're still pretty young for a country. These are our our angry teenage years, right? We are going through this push and pull where we're happy, we're sad, we want this, we want that. And what do you do when you have a teenager who's threatening themselves and others? You just try to get them through this period alive so that their brain can fully form and you can come back to kind of what
Are
a
you
country.
talking about Trump?
No, I'm talking about our country. We're pendulum swinging. We're pendulum swinging. And so for me, I think I don't think there's a single American who feels like this is normal.
And she workshopped that shit.
Yeah.
Like she
Angry
really thought she
teenage
was going to nail it with that one. And it's like.
That's pretty insulting.
I'm curious your reaction. I'll tell you what it brought to mind for me.
Yeah, for me, it's just like deeply insulting and elitist to try and talk down to people. In general, what you want to do as a politician, and I would struggle with this, is meet people where they are. As evidenced by my old age comments during the Social Security. I can say that I'm a commentator, but you're not supposed to talk about this stuff as if you are some child who is easily swayed and not actually taking your concern seriously. I think that was the real problem, not only with her comments, but also in the diagnosis of what the problem to address there is. Because if it is purely an emotional problem, then you have to meet it only with emotion and with rhetoric. If it was a problem and a reaction against policy decisions and the conditions of our lives, then the appropriate diagnosis is very, very different in the way that you would meet those two things. That's kind of how I saw it.
Yeah, I think that I read a lot into it actually because, I mean, just knowing her ideology, like she's just like, a standard establishment, Dem, lib, whatever. Number one, if it's just the angry teenage years, it's just like something that naturally occurs that you just have to let it run its course and get to the other side. And it's like, well, then you are completely avoiding the root causes of what led the country to be in such tumult. You're completely avoiding the way the Iraq War radicalized people, the way that the financial crisis screwed people over, the way that neoliberalism's failures to improve the material conditions of people for them to be able to afford like a basic, stable, middle-class life, the way that it stripped apart communities. Like if this is just a natural thing that you have to go through, then there's no blame to assign of how we ended up here. That's number one. And number two, there's nothing you really have to do to deal with it either. It's like, oh, well, they'll just, after a period of time, they'll get it out of their system and their hormones will calm down and they'll go back to being, normal human beings. It's like, no, actually, there needs to be a reckoning. There needs to be a reckoning specifically within the Democratic Party and their betrayals and their, coziness with a billionaire class that has led them astray from your core mission that used to be delivering for working class people. It leads you to that conclusion of like a James Carville of like, just let them punch themselves out and don't really do anything. And listen, politically, maybe, because they're betting on things are going to be a disaster for Trump. Maybe it's possible, it's not looking that great for him right at this moment. It's not looking great for Republicans right at this moment, especially since Trump probably can't run for another term again, and there's no one else who has really the charisma and star power to pull off the things that he's able to pull off. But in terms of actually, building a durable majority and delivering for people, there has to be a true reckoning within the party. And so in addition to, I think you're right about the sort of condescension elitism that comes with this, which is ironic because she's being pitched as like, oh, she's from Michigan, so she really understands people, whatever. But I also, to me, the bigger problem is it lets everybody off the hook, both from the root causes and for what needs to happen now to right the ship.
Yeah, I completely agree with that diagnosis. And it is interesting, too, because that's how these more establishment folks seem to be meeting the moment. You flagged a bunch of moments here from Gavin Newsom and Steve Bannon on the podcast. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just want to set this up a little bit before we get to Greasy Gavin and Sloppy Steve here. So I think this is Gavin Newsom's third podcast of his new series, which, by the way, is apparently using campaign funds to promote it, which seems wrong to me, but whatever. That's what's happening. And all three of them have been right-wing like commentators or influencers. You had Charlie Kirk was number one. Michael Savage, who's like a right-wing radio host, I guess, was number two. And then you have Steve Bannon. I think that's the right order. So when I saw originally that was the direction he was going in, because the first two were announced right away, so you knew he was leading off with these conservative commentators, I was like, oh, this is actually really smart. He's going to get in there and he's going to fight with them the way he did with Ron DeSantis. Mm-hmm. That was so popular with Democrats. And as we discussed earlier in the show, I don't think that the liberal base of the Democratic Party has like an ideological priority right now. They just want to see someone who can fight. And I am deeply worried, because I am not a Gavin Newsom fan, that someone like him, who has the rhetorical debate skills to pull off the appearance of a fighter, could snow people into thinking like this is the guy for the moment and he's got to be our next nominee or whatever. But that is not what happened. Instead, in each of these, and I've watched a good chunk of all of them, it is so friendly, it's so buddy-buddy. Whoever it is that's sitting, or whether it's Charlie Kirk or Michael Savage or Steve Bannon, are allowed to endlessly insult him, number one, which is like super cuck behavior, with him just sort of like laughing it off. And number two, just like try to pitch people on their ideological view with next to no pushback. So as an example of that, I present to you some snippets from Gavin Newsom and Steve Bannon here from his most recent podcast. Let's take a listen.
Everything happening with the markets, everything happening with the with tariffs, everything happening with CR and a potential government.
Don't be giving tariffs stink eye. I don't want to start off with you giving it stink eye already.
We'll stress.
I'm a tariff guy.
I appreciate that, and we'll see. We'll stress test that.
The purpose I want to do this is I want to convert you to be a tariff guy also. This is part of the process to unwind you from being a globalist to make you a populist nationalist. It's a long journey. It's a long journey, but I think you'll get there.
This is part of the deprogramming, is it? I appreciate it. And by the way, for the record, I'm going down your rabbit hole right here. I'm not an absolutist as it relates to being against tariffs by any stretch of the imagination. And I thought it interesting what I think Biden tripled tariffs on aluminum and steel, which is getting a lot of attention in this country today as it relates to Canada. And Democrats weren't screaming and yelling about that.
So that was kind of how things kicked off. At another point, I mean, super friendly. And then he's, and why are these Democrats so like hypocritical? It's like, I mean, you see what I'm talking about here. Mm-hmm. There was another moment where Bannon insists repeatedly that the election was stolen from them in 2020. And even on that, which is like a core liberal priority, rebutting that lie, Gavin just kind of lets it slide. Let's take a listen.
We learned after President Trump, and look, we disagree on this, but President Trump won the 2020 election, and we were kind of shattered as a movement when he left Washington, D.C., and we had to go back to basics to say, it can't be somebody else do something. We had to do something, and that's where we went back to really a pure populist movement to go at the grassroots, the precinct strategy, and kind of rebuild ourselves from there.
Well, and I appreciate the notion of agency, that we're not bystanders in the world. It's decisions, not conditions, that determine our fate and future. And that fundamental notion of agency, I think, is important more broadly. And I think that goes to some of the issues around, victimization. And I see a lot of that, respectively, on the right, increasingly, even with Trump often approaching things from that sort of mindset.
What do you mean? What do you mean for Trump?
I think there's sort of the grievance narrative that comes from Trump. This notion there is sort of a victim.
Well, they did try to put him in prison for 300 years, right? They did try to bankrupt him.
Well, if
a guy had ever had a set of grievances, they did steal, according to us, and we're firm believers of the 2020 election, which I think worked out better. That providentially that he was able to come back with that gap, because I think you're seeing a much more not just new and improved, but somebody that's much more in command of these decisions and really stepping up in a way that we could have never done before.
So was kind of the energy. I mean, listen, obviously we do this show. We believe in people talking to people who have different opinions than them, but it's just profoundly interesting to me how much Gavin Newsom is misreading the moment for the Democratic base, because clearly he wants to run for president. Clearly, this podcast is about setting him up for that. And he is really disqualifying himself in the eyes of many Democratic base voters because of the patty cakes way that he approached these conversations. And the other thing that jumps out at me too, Saagar, is like, first of all, Steve Bannon is very smart. Steve Bannon knows what his ideology is, knows the world that he wants to see made, knows how he wants to convert people over to that worldview and ideology. And a just sort of like empty, ambition-driven neoliberal like Gavin Newsom, who I think really doesn't have much of an ideology to speak of as well, like you're no match for that because you don't, number one, you don't really care. And number two, like some kind of ideology is going to beat no ideology every day. And so instead of using your platform to offer a different vision, and you can do that in a way that's not like ugly and like it doesn't have to be personal. But if you're not offering any sort of competing vision, you're just giving up space for Steve Bannon to make more converts effectively.
I don't know what Gavin's strategy is here. I mean, maybe it's that he's got a nice smile and he's the governor of the biggest state, and maybe he thinks these liberals, I mean, if we're being honest, are going to vote for him anyways if he does win the nomination. So maybe he doesn't need them necessarily, and he can
he's got to win a Democratic primary.
Right, but
and there's going to be a crowded field.
I don't know. I mean, I'm saying from his perspective is what? Is that, okay, we just had an election, we didn't win the popular vote. I've got to try and have some inroads here with the dudes and with the other people who are more MAGA possible friendly, show them that I'm not some horrible monster and that I'm nice and greasy, and I can give it to them what they need, while also maybe in the future giving the Democratic base what it needs. Are there really going to be boomers in Iowa who aren't going to vote for Gavin because he had Steve Bannon on his podcast? A little bit skeptical, right? 18 months from now.
You're wrong about that.
No, we got 2 more years to go. It's been 50 days. I mean, just an eternity.
My theory is that the way politicians conducted themselves right now, when it was uncertain and when it was difficult because they did just suffer a defeat, is going to be a critical litmus test in 2028. Because that is the way that the Democratic base has really aligned itself up to this point. Where, again, I wish it was more ideological. It's not. Most of the people, not all, but most of the people who are filling in the gap of being those fighters happen to be on the left, happen to be people like Bernie Sanders. AOC has been very vocal. Al Green is another person who's really, he's not going to be running for president or whatever, but I'm just saying, like, Maxwell Frost is another one who's been outspoken and people feel like, okay, this is someone who's at least trying to put up a fight, et cetera. Rashida Tlaib, certainly. In any case, most of the people who have emerged to fill that gap happen to be on the left. But I was fearful that a Gavin Newsom, who is very rhetorically skilled, who was very effective in that debate against Ron DeSantis, I think even conservatives had to admit, like, I handled himself pretty well there. If he had these people on and he fought with them, I think he would be unstoppable in 2028. And I'm actually glad, in a sense, that he's approaching it this way. And what I attribute it to, Saagar, is I think he's in these Silicon Valley donor circles where they're jealous of the right. It's the same people like Hakeem Jeffries was talking to. And they want the more like conciliatory, capitulate, like make nice. That's the approach that they want. There is a big divide between that like donor base of the Democratic Party, especially the Silicon Valley donor base of the Democratic Party, and where the Democratic base is and what they want to see. And I can promise you, he is misreading the moment for the Democratic base in order to win a Democratic primary, like in an unbelievable way. So if you think about like the viewers of Brian Tyler Cohen, if you think about the Midas Touch brothers, like they in particular have been disgusted with him. Their viewers are disgusted with him. And that's where the energy in the party is right now.
I just don't want to overread it.
You're right.
Because who's got better political judgment, the left or people like Gavin Newsom?
That's my point. Is this isn't the left?
No,
and that's what I think Gavin Newsom is reading it as well. Because he thinks, oh, these are just like the Bernie people. They're always mad about everything. Whatever, shut up, right? You people voted for Joe Biden last time around. But the difference is, and this is what I think the Democratic Party is not is not understanding and is really failing on is that it's not just the left. I'm telling you, it's the indivisible groups. It's the core, like the people who went to the Women's March. It is the core Democrat. You go to your average Democratic County Party meeting and it's flooded with regular normie Democrat voters. Like the median voter in the party is disgusted with party leadership for not putting up enough of a fight. And I think that's where they are profoundly misreading their own voters because they think that it's still just like, oh, the Bernie people. No, this is your MSNBC watcher. These are the people who have flooded to Midas Touch, the people that have flooded to Brian Tyler Cohen, your normie resistance Democrat that thinks that Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries need to resign yesterday, that are thoroughly disgusted with the patty cakes with Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon and Michael Savage and whatever, and are really looking for something different than what the Democratic leadership are providing right now.
Maybe, it's certainly possible. I'm not ready to count Gavin out yet. I mean, you don't.
I wouldn't count him out.
You don't become governor of the biggest state in the country.
He is hurting himself. He is hurting himself right now.
I'm just not ready. I don't know. I mean, part of the reason, I'll just explain this because this is difficult. And there's a lot of data necessarily to back you up. But every online Democratic freakout and or vibe trend that I've seen from the liberals has never really worked out. And in general, you'd be probably better off over the last 5 years betting against anything that AOC and Bernie and all of them are fighting on than being on the side of them. So if you look at the social trends, if you look at from, wokeism to BLM to what, I mean, I could go on forever. Defending Biden, which a lot of them did, pro-Kamala, Vibe Shift, Brad Summer, Tim Walz, none of these bets have worked out. So I just am skeptical that this time their grand political judgment is there as opposed to the great survivors like Schumer and Gavin Newsom. In the interim, you might be correct, but their political judgment and track record is bad, especially in the back, from the last 5 to 7 years
You think Gavin
of overall
Newsom's political judgment.
I mean, he survived recall. He survived recall.
In
He's got a high enough approval rating.
California.
Listen, I don't know how they put up with him over there, but they're the people who don't, they just left. I guess they moved to Florida, but they like him. I don't really get it. But it's not. I'm not making a judgment about myself. I'm looking purely at the guy's metrics. He seems to be doing fine. He's got a decent approval rating with a lot of Democrats. So my only point is just like I'm skeptical that we're once again trying to see some wish cast of what progressives and liberals have a very good way of shaping a narrative through media and through Twitter and et cetera into believing things are way more popular than they actually are. And there's no electoral evidence to back any of that up.
Who do you think is going to be voting in a Democratic
I have
primary?
No idea. Listen, I don't know.
In a Democratic primary, that you have to appeal to
okay,
liberals.
But by that standard, then Bernie would have won in the 2020
No, because liberals were not behind him. Saagar, that's what you're missing, and that's what he's missing. Is I'm not talking about the Bernie Sanders voter. Yes, they're pissed off. Whatever. They're going to be both. They're going to be looking at it from an ideological valence. No, I'm talking about your standard normie Democrat, like the base of the party. And that is what is so different. I mean, that's why these channels are blowing up massively.
Yeah, but how
that's
do we know that's not young,
energy.
disaffected people who are barely not going to vote anyway? Like, I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but I have no idea what the 65-year-old boomer out there and how they're exactly taking the pulse.
Do you put no stock in the fact that, listen, I know polls can be off, blah, 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 but the Democratic leadership being underwater with the Democratic base, 49% disapproval to 40% approval, that's so different, wildly different.
I put some stock in it.
And that is your normie Democrat voter. Like, they are flooding these offices with calls. They are enraged by the capitulation from Joe and Mika and MSNBC and the Washington Post and Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. Like, that is a very different dynamic than we have seen before. And so my contention here is simply that Gavin Newsom has an opportunity to make himself invincible in 2028, because I do think he has a lot of the things going for him that he's got plenty of money behind him. He's a smooth operator, all that stuff. But rather than making himself invincible, because if he came out as this like fighter in this moment, I think he would be very difficult to beat in 2028. Instead, I think that he is positioning himself in a way that hobbles him with the Democratic base. And I feel really confident about that. Now, is that a guarantee? No, of course not. But is he doing damage to himself when he had an opportunity to sort of make himself an unstoppable force? Yeah, I do think so.
Maybe. I don't know. I'm not ready to make the judgment call yet. I just don't trust the political judgment of a lot of the folks who I see at the helm right now. They've just had a terrible track record. And, by the way, 40% approval is still higher than a lot of Republicans feel about their leadership. And those people survive all the time and they continue to win elections. So I'm not saying they aren't necessarily different, but you could go much lower. And I still think that things could be, I just don't think things will necessarily manifest in the same way. Will he be invincible? He's making different bets in terms of how he sees the coalition. Like maybe there's also something to be said about somebody who wants to run for president as opposed to somebody who just needs a bunch of libs to show up in a low turnout midterm situation. That actually is qualitatively different for the overall base. I don't know, who exactly or what is correct. I always just think it's important to put that caution out there. Like, look at the political track record of these people, and it's terrible. It's not one that has worked out at the ballot box. And so with that, you should think about that in the future. They could be correct this time, but they just don't have enough they don't have enough going for them in the past for me to make any like real trust in their overall political judgment. I think it's definitely working to raise money online to get a bunch of liberals who already hate Trump, excited. Sure, that's not hard actually though. What's actually hard is to win an election, which they've been completely unable to do.
We'll put a pin in it.
Yeah.
But again, I think you're focusing on like AOC and Bernie, and that's not actually what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the mainstream of the party, which you definitionally need in order to win a Democratic primary.
Sure, but then there's no mainstream elector or elected official who has access to probably more privileged data than you or I that is acting in the way that you're describing, which is what makes me a little bit skeptical that any of this is real. I mean, there are a lot of political entrepreneurs. These are the most opportunist pieces of egotistical people in the world.
Open up a whole other can of worms. But Tim Walz is moving in more of the direction where he's going out and doing town halls, following in sort of like the Bernie model in Republican red districts. So, I mean, this is the other thing. It's like the Newsom approach is also a very elitist approach versus the let me go out and not talk to like Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon. Let me go out and talk to voters in these places that, that we've lost and that we need to win back and in swing districts and in red parts of the country. And, I also think that is a much better approach, going to the grassroots and talking to regular people about what's going on for them versus talking to, making nice with the right-wing influencer.
But that's kind of my point, is that what we're trusting the political judgment of one of the only two Democrats in the world to lose a popular vote election in 20 years. Like, I don't trust that person, to look at their overall political judgment. I'm just saying, whenever you look at somebody like him, it's like, what, you're going to put up, do we really want to point to who's the guy who lost in 92? Dan Quayle?
You're going to trust the political judgment of a dude who almost got recalled in California, a Democrat who almost got recalled in California?
I wish he almost got recalled. He blew it out.
The fact they even made it to that point, though, is crazy. Like, you trust that? You think that guy's the political genius?
No, but between the two, I would pick Gavin, 100%. There's no way I would bet on Tim Walz after his track record, but I guess that's a separate conversation for another day. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.